Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So the more I get into the poetry world, the more the possibilities seem to open up. There are so many different poets working on the scene and they're all doing such different stuff. And I'm someone who, tries to find something to hold on to, something to love and be inspired by in everything I read in a wide variety of styles. And I think it's really important to read things that are different than what I write and different than what I'm initially attracted to, because it's an easy way to just expand your taste range and just develop new areas of poetry that you can learn to love. So this week I want to talk about a book that's a little different for me, poetry that is not of a style I am immediately drawn to, in The Red Bird by Joyelle McSweeney. So I would say the kind of poetry I read and write is maybe a little bit more on the accessible side. It's poetry that feels and sounds like natural speech. It's not poetry that you necessarily have to work hard for. Not that there's like easy and hard poetry, but I think the poetry I read maybe has more apparent meaning. So for me, in reading The Red Bird, it's more about appreciating really, really beautiful language on a line-by-line basis. So my enjoyment of it was less about getting an overall sense of the poem and what it means and what sort of the clever twist is halfway through. It's more about the really clever little moments of wordplay and the really beautiful language and the juxtapositions that happen line by line. So I think what really is characterizing this collection is these very sort of strange, mysterious, juxtaposed metaphors. And those metaphors are super interesting, and like reading it as a poet, it kind of makes me want to explore that style a little bit more in my own writing, which is a big part of reading different kinds of poetry, is it's just making me a little bit more well-rounded as a writer. But yeah, it's less about immediately getting meaning from a poem. This is my first time reading it. Maybe if I read it a couple more times, I would glean a little more meaning. But I think it's a good exercise in being comfortable with not knowing exactly what it means and just appreciating the language, which I think for a lot of poetry you have to be comfortable doing that, and that might be a bit of adjustment for people who only read prose trying to get into poetry. Which is why maybe, I don't know if this is the book to start with, but maybe as you're getting more comfortable with poetry in general, this is one to move into. I mean, it's a matter of taste. Like when I'm talking about these metaphors, in the first poem, there's a metaphor that's very interesting and kind of sticks with you. Up on the hill, a white tent had just got unsteadily to its feet, like a foal or just foaled cathedral. Which I think is very cool and interesting metaphor, and I can see it, like it has life to it. And there's that kind of whimsy in these types of metaphors that she uses throughout the collection. Then underneath the whimsical language and sort of the playing with words, I think there's a lot of darkness in this collection. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but in one of these poems, she says something like, seeing the world in this highly metaphorical lens is a means of survival somehow. Like seeing the world in this metaphorical way and just like embracing this creative energy is helping the speaker somehow get through this depressive era in their life. And so as the readers, we're seeing the world through this lens, and I think that's why it's hard to totally understand what's going on, because it's kind of a surreal realism, and we get sort of glimmers of darkness, little bits and pieces, at least in my reading. So I feel like there's some kind of implied trauma in here, and that the way the speaker is seeing the world in this collection is therapeutic in some way. So a couple poems seem to imply that there's a death of a child in the speaker's life, or like a stillborn situation. And again, that's my reading of it. I don't have all the answers, and I'm sure other people would read this and have different interpretations. But two poems in particular kind of make me think that maybe that is contributing to the like depression that the metaphoric creativity is kind of blocking out. And you know, I feel like even more so in poetry than other mediums of writing, it's very valid to have different readings. Everybody's gonna find a little bit of a different meaning in something. In poetry that does not have such an apparent meaning, like the poetry in this book, I think opens up that possibility even more. So one of the poems that seems to imply pregnancy and the loss of a child and those sort of images is Toy Maternity. Also, the poems I'm going to read happen to be some of my favorites in the collection. Toy Maternity. Last year, like so many others, he bought racehorses on the bull market. The darlings deflated en masse. So I debuted on next to nothing, one slipper on the Turkish carpet, half bustle and half wig. The rescue vessel sinks itself by filling its ballast tanks, slips under the listing vessel, then surfaces, cargo and all. Therefore, he who believes in me goes into me, and he who goes into me has me. I of course refer to that fleet of buried ships, the 14 yellow prows that carried the pharaoh to the afterlife and came back mostly rotted, and to the smallest body ever, orbited that closest, that primitive body. So like just some things that make me think this is about pregnancy and maybe a loss of a pregnancy. Obviously there's maternity in the title, the end about the smallest body ever and that primitive body, and this whole metaphor about rescue vessels, and this whole idea of vessels I feel like is a metaphor for a woman being pregnant, and then this whole thing about ships carrying the pharaoh to the afterlife makes me think that this is some kind of metaphor for a woman carrying a life that kind of ends before it begins. And again, that's just my reading of it. I mean, you may have just heard me read that and think you're absolutely crazy. There's no way that's in that poem, but that's the fun of poetry. So this second poem that I think maybe more strongly implies that is entitled Elba. There's more than one poem in this collection called Elba. She does that a lot, using the same title for different poems, but here we go. The maid shows up to find it in its beds, young, suffocated, shy of its birthdays. Fallen trees. The stadiums are designed to be flooded. Beaten glass is designed to be non-transparent. Virgin Mother, I must have happened without happening to keep you that way. Keep me good, or at least lucky. Dear Madam, I'm able. I was, ere I saw God in the detail of your fine brocade, lady at the virginal. It shines and makes everything shine. A view of Delft, the dull side of the foil, what we were before in the nursery, crying and crying out artlessly in front of one another, in our beds or on the toilet. What are you inside of now? A nut? This film of heat unwrapping from the styrofoam cup? A heron rose itself across the sky. I need to tell you this while you're asleep. The noise was a real noise, but not in a real place. So there are still moments in this poem where I don't really know what to make of it. I know the language is beautiful and I'm interested in it. I don't always know what it means, but I feel like the opening lines, talking young, suffocated, shy of its birthdays, seems to imply passing before you're born. And then this talk about, virgin mother and the nursery and crying in the nursery and in our beds and on the toilet. I don't know, that seems like what it's about. It's a very sad poem, it's heartbreaking. And the last line, the noise was a real noise, but not in a real place. I can't even confidently say in any way that I know exactly what that means, but it just seems really sorrowful to me. But anyways, those two poems in particular really struck me, and that's my interpretation of them reading them. If you have a different interpretation, let me know. Okay, so on a more trivial note, I really like the cover design of this. I like the colors they chose, the image, the kind of minimalism of it all, which, is not the most important thing, but it does matter. I mean, it looks good on the shelf. That means something. So yeah, I think the publisher, Fence Books, did a good job with that. And just another note on how to keep finding more poets and keep finding more things to read. If you read something and you like it, figure out what press it's coming out of, since so many of these poets are operating out of small presses. Fence Books still exists. I looked at their website, still got books. They have a magazine, so you can find ways into more poets like that. So just wrapping this up, yeah, it's a different kind of style for me, but I feel like I got a lot out of it. And there's a lot of just really, really beautiful language in this on like a line-by-line level. It's a really interesting read. So if that sounds like it's up your alley, check it out. Yeah, so classes have started back this week. I am teaching 2 classes and taking 3, and also trying to keep up with thesis work, so I've gotten a little busy. But hopefully I can keep doing this. I like doing this every week, so we'll see if I can maintain.